The first time my ex-boyfriend called me after 3 years of silence, I was standing in a narrow wine aisle under cold grocery store lights, comparing two bottles I had no real opinion on. His name lit up my screen so suddenly that for a second I thought I had imagined it. Jason. I just stared at it. 3 years. 3 full years since my sister married him. 3 years since the church doors closed behind me and everyone inside pretended what happened to me was just unfortunate timing, not deliberate cruelty. 3 years since I stopped asking certain people to understand my pain and started learning how to survive without their permission. The phone kept vibrating in my hand. A cart rattled past behind me. Someone near the deli counter laughed too loudly. A child was begging for cookies in the next aisle. The world stayed ordinary in that insulting way it always does, when something old and rotten suddenly claws its way back into your day. I let the call ring out. Then he called again. I declined that one too. A text came through almost immediately. Please. Emma, just talk to me once. I felt something cold move through my chest. Not love, not even anger at first. Recognition. That old, bitter recognition that some people only remember your number when the person they chose over you stops answering theirs. I put the bottle back on the shelf and walked out of the store without buying anything. The parking lot smelled like wet asphalt and gasoline. Low gray clouds pressed over the city, and a sharp wind pushed at the hem of my coat as I stood beside my car, staring at his message. Please. Emma. He used to say my name like it meant home. Now it looked like debt. Before I tell you why that call mattered, and why hearing from Jason again felt less like heartbreak, and more like proof that some patterns really do end exactly where they deserve to, let me take you back to where all of this began. And if this story resonates with you at any point, like and subscribe, only if it resonates, because some betrayals do not come from strangers. They come from the people who know exactly which part of your life would hurt most to lose Sim. My name is Emma Halbrook, and for most of my life, my older sister Claire had one gift nobody in my family ever wanted to name, honestly. She did not just want attention. She wanted comparison, and she needed to win it. Claire was older than me by 2 years, beautiful in the easy, polished kind of way that makes other women instinctively smooth their hair when they stand near you. Honey blonde hair, blue eyes, perfect posture, a smile that looked warm from across the room and predatory if you were standing close enough to know what it meant. I was the quieter sister. Not invisible exactly, just less willing to turn every room into a contest. We grew up in a suburb outside Richmond, Virginia, in a brick colonial house with green shutters, a gravel driveway, and a mother who believed a tidy home could disguise almost anything. My father, Richard, sold commercial flooring. My mother, Denise, taught piano lessons out of the front room and cared more about harmony in theory than justice in practice. That was the real engine of our family. Not love, not loyalty. Appearance. If things looked intact from the outside, my mother could tolerate almost any kind of damage inside the walls. Claire learned that early. By 11, she could insult me in a tone so sweet, it sounded like concern. By 14, she knew exactly how to borrow something of mine, keep it long enough that asking for it back made me seem petty, then return it slightly damaged and say I was overreacting. My mother always had an explanation ready. Claire is just more expressive. Claire doesn't always think before she speaks. Claire is having a hard week. Claire didn't mean it like that. I spent my childhood standing in the shadow of those excuses. The first time I understood that Claire did not simply enjoy being favored, but actively enjoyed my discomfort. I was 16. I had auditioned for the lead in our school's winter production, and got it, not because someone handed it to me, because I had worked for it. I still remember the smell of dust and old curtains backstage when the cast list went up. I remember my pulse in my throat. I remember the paper trembling slightly on the corkboard under the weight of all the girls pressing in to read it. Emma Halbrook lead. For maybe 10 glorious seconds, I felt uncomplicated joy. Then Claire, who had not even auditioned, leaned over my shoulder. Read the sheet. And laughed softly. "Oh," she said. "I thought lead would go to someone with more stage presence." She said it lightly. That was always her talent. Not dramatic enough to be called cruel, just sharp enough to leave a mark. The joy drained out of me so fast it almost embarrassed me. That was her real gift. She could reduce your happiness without ever appearing to attack it directly. By college, I had learned to keep good news close to my chest until it was impossible for anyone to shrink it. I went to the University of Virginia and studied communications and brand strategy. I liked systems, patterns, the small hidden mechanics underneath why people trust what they trust and buy what they buy. I liked structure because structure had rules. And rules, when applied honestly, did not care who was prettier at the dinner table. Claire stayed closer to home. She shifted through majors, changed apartments frequently, dated loudly, broke up publicly, and somehow remained the gravitational center of every family conversation, even when she was failing. That was another lesson my family taught me young. Competence makes some parents lean on you harder. Chaos makes them excuse someone else longer. By the time I was 25, I was working as a junior account strategist at a boutique marketing firm in Richmond. The pay was modest. The hours were long. The office coffee was awful. But it was mine. I had a one-bedroom apartment with pale wood floors, a tiny balcony that overlooked a parking lot, and a second-hand dining table I loved because I bought it without asking anyone's opinion. I had friends from work. A routine. A favorite Thai place on Carey Street. A life that felt small but honest. That was when I met Jason. He came into the coffee shop under our office, one rainy Tuesday while I was standing in line, trying to decide whether spending $7 on lunch soup counted as recklessness. He was ahead of me. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dark-haired. With the kind of face people describe as trustworthy before they know better. He ordered black coffee and a blueberry muffin. Stepped aside. Then turned back because I had dropped my card on the floor without noticing. "You dropped this," he said. I looked up. He smiled. Not flashy, just direct. That was the first thing I liked about him. He didn't seem performative. The second thing I liked was that he remembered me. The next day he was there again. Then the day after that, on the fourth day, he asked, "Do you always look like you're mentally reorganizing the room?" I laughed. "Only when I'm overwhelmed." "So always?" "During business hours." "Yes." He held out his hand. Jason Mercer. Emma. That was it. No dramatic beginning. No lightning. No music swelling in the background. Just two people in a coffee line and the easy beginning of repetition. He worked in commercial real estate development. He had a calm voice, a steady presence, and a way of listening that made even ordinary details feel worth finishing. The first time we had dinner, he asked questions and stayed for the answers. The first time we spent a Sunday together, he helped me assemble a bookshelf and did not make a joke about instruction manuals or masculinity or being above the task. He just sat cross-legged on my living room rug with a screwdriver and said, "Pass me the smaller screws." It was a simple thing. But after a lifetime of men in my extended family acting like participation in domestic life deserved applause, I found it strangely moving. He met my friends first. Then, eventually, my parents. My mother approved immediately. He had the right job, the right manners, the right kind of watch, the right kind of restraint. My father liked that Jason shook his hand properly and asked decent questions instead of talking over everyone. Claire was late to that dinner. Of course she was. She came in 20 minutes after dessert with glossy lips, a cashmere coat draped over one arm, and the expression she always wore when entering a room where she expected to be forgiven for something before she even spoke. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Parking was awful." Then she saw Jason. I noticed the shift immediately. Not because it was dramatic, because I had spent my life learning Claire's moods, the way some people learn weather patterns. She smiled at him. He stood politely. They exchanged names. That should have been nothing. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. And maybe in another family, with another sister, it would have been. But Claire had always treated my life like a shelf she was entitled to browse. That night, after everyone else had moved into the living room, I was in the kitchen rinsing dessert plates when she drifted in behind me and leaned against the counter. "He's handsome," she said. I kept my eyes on the sink. "Thanks." Claire smiled in that way she had when she wanted to sound casual while planting something poisonous. "He's more your type than I expected." I looked over. "What does that mean?" She shrugged. "Nothing. Just usually you go for safer." Safer. That was one of her favorite words for me. A disguised insult dressed as personality analysis. I turned back to the dishes. "He is safe." She laughed softly. "Well, let's hope he stays interested." I should have said something then. I should have looked at her and named the thing she was doing. But people who grow up in homes like mine get trained to survive first and interpret later. So I let the moment slide into memory and told myself she was just being Claire. Jason and I dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. They were good years. That matters. Because people like to imagine that betrayal only happens in relationships that were already dying. As if the wreckage would somehow hurt less if there had been warning signs big enough to justify the ending. There weren't. Not at first. We built ordinary happiness. Saturday groceries. Shared passwords. Quiet dinners on my couch. Road trips with bad playlists. Arguments about whether throw pillows were practical. The kind of life that is boring only to people who have never had to fight for peace. By the time he proposed, I had stopped bracing. He did it in a botanical garden outside the city in early spring. Under pale lights strung through iron arches, while the air smelled like damp earth and magnolia. He looked nervous enough to be endearing. I said yes before he finished the question. For a while after that, I was stupidly happy. I say that with tenderness now. Not shame. There is nothing foolish about trusting the person you love. The shame belongs to the one who made trust expensive. We rented a townhouse together with narrow stairs, a noisy dishwasher, and one perfect square of morning sunlight in the kitchen that always landed near the sink around 8:30. We argued about guest lists and cake flavors. We made spreadsheets. We bookmarked venues. We chose songs. We built the first version of what I thought adulthood was supposed to feel like. Then Claire became interested. At first it looked like effort, the kind my mother had always begged me to appreciate. "She's trying," my mother said after Claire offered to help with venue visits. "Maybe this will finally bring you closer." No sentence beginning with, "Maybe this will finally fix" Claire has ever ended well. Still, il est rien. Not deeply, but enough. She came dress shopping once. She offered opinions on flowers. She started texting Jason directly about practical things. Could he look at a leak in her apartment? Did he know a contractor? Could he recommend someone for a car issue? Each request was small enough to seem reasonable. That was the architecture of it. Nothing outrageous on its own. Everything corrosive in repetition. The first time I really noticed, it was at a backyard cookout at my parents' house in July. The air was thick and hot. My father was outside ruining a second batch of burgers. My mother had every kitchen surface covered in bowls no one needed. Cicadas screamed from the trees. A radio somewhere down the street was playing old country music too loudly. I was inside slicing watermelon when I looked through the window and saw Jason and Claire near the patio table. They weren't touching. They weren't doing anything I could point to later as proof. They were just laughing, but it was the kind of laugh that belongs to rhythm, private rhythm, timing built too quickly. Something in me tightened. My mother looked out the same window and smiled. Claire's actually in a good mood for once. I said nothing. Later, on the drive home, Jason asked if I was okay. "Why?" I said. "You got quiet?" I watched the trees blur past the passenger window. The sky was turning lavender over the highway. "My sister flirts when she's bored." He laughed once. Like the thought was ridiculous. "Emma?" "What?" "There's nothing there." He said it easily, without defensiveness, without hesitation. And because love always wants one more chance to trust itself, I believed him. That was the problem. Not that I was naive, that I wanted peace more than conflict. And people like Claire can smell that on you. A month later, she asked if Jason could help her move out of her apartment. I had a work deadline that weekend and couldn't go. My mother stepped in immediately. It would mean so much to her if he helped. She said, "And if he's going to be family, it's good for them to have a decent relationship." So he went. When he came home that evening, he looked tired, more irritable than usual. "How bad was it?" I asked. He dropped his keys into the ceramic bowl by the door. "She owns more shoes than any one person should." "Did she thank you?" A brief pause. Then he said, "Eventually." Something about that answer stayed with me. Not enough to accuse, just enough to remember. The next real fracture came during cake tasting. My mother booked an appointment at a bakery downtown and treated it like a state event. She came. Claire came. Jason came. I came. My father somehow found a way to be stuck at work, which in retrospect may have been the healthiest instinct in the family. The bakery smelled like vanilla and sugar and warm butter. Sunlight was pouring through the front windows. Little porcelain plates were lined up in a row with sample slices and silver forks. I was taking notes when Claire, who had already sampled more champagne than anyone else, looked directly at Jason and said, "Be honest. If you'd met me first, would you still be marrying my sister?" The entire room went still. The woman from the bakery pretended to rearrange napkins. My mother made a tiny face, somewhere between shock and amusement. I looked at Jason. He laughed in that strained, male way that tries to convert discomfort into charm. "I'm definitely not answering that." Claire grinned. She looked thrilled. I looked at my mother. Waiting. She should have shut it down instantly. Any decent mother would have. Instead, she said, "Claire, don't be impossible." In the same tone someone might use if a child reached for frosting too early. Playful, not serious. That was the moment I understood I was alone in the room. Maybe not literally, but morally. I put my fork down and said, "Can we focus on the wedding?" Claire raised both brows. Ouch. That word hung there, as if I were the one making things awkward by refusing to treat disrespect like entertainment. That night, I told my best friend, Mallory. Mallory had known me since college. Short dark hair, zero patience for family mythology. The kind of woman who could make eye contact with your denial and wait for it to dissolve. We were sitting on my apartment floor eating takeout because we hadn't unpacked the dining chairs yet after painting the dining area. When I told her what Claire had said, she put her chopsticks down. "Your sister is testing how much she can do in front of you," she said. I hated how quickly that landed. "You think I'm overreacting?" "No," Mallory said. "I think you've been trained to wait for enough evidence that your pain becomes courtroom, safe before you let yourself have it." I looked at her. She leaned back against the couch. "Emma, there are people who make you prove your own discomfort because they benefit from your hesitation." That sentence stayed with me. Not because I acted on it quickly, because I didn't. By early fall, Jason had started changing in subtle ways. Nothing dramatic enough to point to in one clean accusation. Just small shifts. His phone face down more often. Longer pauses before answering ordinary questions. More late meetings. More vague explanations. A tension in him that showed up fastest when I asked about Claire. If I said, "Did she ever return that tool you lent her?" he'd answer too quickly. Or too casually. Or not quite meet my eyes. One Thursday evening in October, he told me he had to help a colleague move furniture after work. I remember every detail of that moment because betrayal makes archivists out of us. The kitchen smelled faintly like tomato sauce from the pasta I had just made. Rain was tapping against the back windows. The dishwasher was humming. He was knotting his tie looser with one hand while reaching for his keys with the other. "Tonight?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "I won't be too late." I nodded. "Okay." He kissed my forehead before leaving. That should be a harmless memory. It isn't. It is amazing how contaminated tenderness becomes once you know what came after it. I cleaned the kitchen after he left. Wiped counters. Stacked plates. Folded the dish towel. Unloaded a dishwasher that could have waited until morning. "Aropt 47. Mallory texted me. "Are you home?" "Yes." "Why?" A minute later, another message came. "I just saw Jason's car outside Oak and Vine." Oak and Vine was a wine bar downtown. Dim lighting. Date night atmosphere. Not somewhere you help a coworker move furniture. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone else had the same car. Then she sent a photo. His license plate. I sat down so suddenly, the chair legs scraped the tile. The body often knows before the mind is ready. Mine knew. I called him. He answered on the fourth ring. "Hey." I listened. Music. Voices. Glassware. Low conversation. No furniture. No moving. No explanation that could survive contact with the truth. "Where are you?" I asked. A pause. Then, too quickly. "At Brian's? Helping him pack." You're lying. Silence? Then my name? Emma. Where are you? Another pause. Longer this time. Then he said the sentence people use when what they really mean is, I need time to shape this into something less ugly than it is. I can explain. My entire body went cold. Are you with Claire? He said nothing. That was answer enough. I stood up so fast the chair tipped over behind me. Are you with my sister? I asked again. He exhaled slowly. Like somehow he was the one being forced into a painful position. I didn't mean for it to happen. That sentence, that useless, cowardly sentence. Not no, not you're wrong. Not Emma. Listen to me. I didn't mean for it to happen. As if betrayal is weather, as if choices are accidents, as if loyalty can trip and fall. I grabbed my coat and keys without even remembering doing it. When I got to Oakenvine, the sidewalk was slick with recent rain, and the windows were glowing amber against the dark. Inside, every table was lit by candlelight. The room smelled like wine, polished wood, and roasted garlic. Couples leaned toward each other in conversation. Someone near the back laughed softly. And there they were, at a corner table. Claire in a cream sweater, one hand around a wine glass. Smiling that satisfied little smile she always got when she thought she had pushed past some line no one would stop her from crossing. Jason leaning toward her, shoulders tense. Guilt already in his posture, but not enough guilt to get up and leave. For a second I just stood there. My life separated cleanly into before and after. Then I walked over. Claire saw me first. I will never forget her face. Not surprise, not panic. Triumph. As if she had been waiting for the exact scene. Jason stood up so fast his chair knocked backward. Emma. I looked at him once, then at Hare. How long? I asked. The couple at the next table went silent. A waiter pretended to study a menu stand 10 feet away. Claire set down her glass with deliberate calm. Maybe don't do this here. I laughed. A hard, unfamiliar sound. Here? I said. You bring my fiancé to a wine bar and you're worried about here? Jason reached for my arm. I stepped back before he could touch me. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, he said. Again with the language of accidents. How was it supposed to happen? I asked. At my wedding? That hit him. I saw it. But Claire only tilted her head. You're being dramatic. There it was. The family word. The one they used any time pain became inconvenient to the people causing it. I looked at Jason. Are you sleeping with her? His eyes dropped. That was enough. I took off my engagement ring, set it carefully on the table between them, and for one suspended second, the candlelight caught on the stone and made it flash. Then I said, You deserve each other. And I walked out before either of them could try to rewrite the scene. Mallory came over that night with a bottle of wine and 2 sweaters because she said she didn't trust me not to sit on the kitchen floor until morning. She was right. I did sit on the kitchen floor. For a while, with my back against the cabinets and my coat still on, staring at nothing while my whole body shook. At one point, she knelt in front of me and said, Look at me. I did. You are not crazy, she said, and you are not overreacting? This is exactly what it is. That helped. Not because it fixed anything, because naming the truth cleanly was the first thing anybody had done for me all day. Around midnight, my mother called. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "I know you're upset, but please do not make this uglier than it needs to be." I read it twice, then handed the phone to Mallory, because for a second I honestly thought I might throw it. She read it and said, very quietly, "Your mother is out of her mind." Maybe, but insanity repeated long enough starts calling itself family culture. My father called once too, left a voicemail. "Hey, just give everybody a little time. Emotions are high right now." Emotions are high. As if that were the problem. As if the heat of the reaction was more concerning than the act itself. I moved out of the townhouse that weekend. I took my clothes, my books, my laptop, the kitchen things I bought before Jason moved in, the framed print above the dining table, the olive green throw blanket my aunt had given me, the life that was mine. I left the couch, the guest linens, the coffee grinder he insisted on buying, the chairs we assembled together. Every object in that house had become contaminated by sequence. Here is where he hugged me after lying. Here is where we made plans he was already undermining. Here is where I stood, believing I was loved honestly. Grief lives in furniture longer than people admit. I moved into a small apartment across town with thin walls, uneven floors, and a radiator that clanged every morning like someone dropping pipes in the basement. It was not beautiful, but it was blank. Blank felt hoy. That should have been the end. It wasn't. Because a week later, my mother asked me to come by the house for coffee. "We need to talk like adults," she said. That phrase alone should have warned me. In my family, talking like adults usually meant I was about to be asked to absorb something intolerable with composure. Still, I went. Because some bruised, pathetic part of me still hoped for one impossible thing. That my parents would look at what happened and choose me clearly, not because I was perfect, because I was right. The house smelled the same as always. Coffee, furniture polish, the faint powdery scent of my mother's piano room. Family photos lined the hallway. Claire at prom. Claire en vacation. Claire at 21 in a white dress at some engagement party for someone else. Photos of me too. Technically, but fewer. Smeller. Group shots mostly. My mother had set coffee cups on the dining room table. My father sat at one end, already looking tired. My mother sat straight-backed in her chair like she was preparing to moderate a dispute between neighbors. And Claire was there. Of course she was. Wearing one of my mother's cardigans. Calm. Comfortable. As if she had every right to occupy the center of this conversation. I almost turned around and left. But my mother said, "Please, sit." So I sat. No one spoke for a moment. Then my mother folded her hands and said, "We need to find a way through this." I stared at her. Through what? She sighed like I was already making it harder than necessary. What happened was painful. No one is saying otherwise. But dragging this out is only going to poison the whole family. That was the exact moment the last stupid piece of hope in me began to die. Because there it was. Not accountability. Not outrage. Management. I looked at Claire. She was staring into her coffee, as if she were the one enduring something difficult. Then I looked back at my mother. "You invited me here to tell me not to react." "That is not fair," she said. "No, then what is fair?" My father rubbed his forehead. My mother's mouth thinned. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. You and Jason were already having issues. The room went very still. I looked at her. Really looked. You're doing this? I asked. She lifted her chin. I'm saying relationships are complicated. No. Some things are complicated. Infertility is complicated. Illness is complicated. Addiction is complicated. Your daughter sleeping with your other daughter's fiancé while she plans her wedding is not complicated. It is betrayal. I stood up slowly. The chair legs scraped over the wood floor. Claire finally spoke then. Softly, calmly, the way she always did when she wanted to make cruelty sound reasonable. He made a choice. Emma. I turned toward her. So did you. She shrugged. And then, with the same precision she had been practicing since childhood, she said, maybe he wanted someone who didn't make love feel like a staff meeting. That was the moment the room changed for me forever. Not because her insult was clever, because my mother did not stop it. That silence was the real wound. I picked up my purse. My hands were perfectly steady. You do not get me back after this, I said. My mother frowned. Emma? Do not be dramatic. There was that word again. The family verdict. The instant conversion of pain into inconvenience. I looked at my father, still silent. At my mother, offended. At Claire, satisfied. And something inside me old, exhausted, finally done, locked into place. Watch me, I said. Then I left. That was the day I stopped confusing blood with safety. A month later, an ivory envelope arrived in my mailbox. Heavy cardstock, my parents' address in the corner, my name in my mother's careful handwriting. I knew what it was before I opened it. Inside was a wedding invitation. Claire Halbrook and Jason Whitmore request the honor of your presence. No note, no apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just elegant paper and a ceremony time. I stood in my kitchen reading it, while the refrigerator hummed behind me, and the late afternoon light turned everything gold in that mocking way. Beautiful light sometimes does, when your life is not beautiful at all. That was when I understood something I should have understood earlier. This had never been just about attraction, or timing, or passion, or two people making terrible choices. It was about conquest. Claire had not just wanted Jason, she wanted to prove she could take him. And once she had, the real prize was not the relationship. It was me knowing she had won. 3 days later, my mother called to ask what I planned to wear. I almost admired the scale of the delusion. I was on my apartment floor assembling a cheap bookshelf with an Allen wrench that kept slipping in my hand. A thunderstorm had just passed through, and the windows were still fogged at the corners. The room smelled faintly of cardboard, rain, and lemon cleaner. My phone buzzed across the floor. I answered, mostly because I wanted to hear how she would say it. Hey, sweetheart, my mother began, using the same bright voice she always used when she wanted to step carefully around something broken without actually cleaning it up. I just wanted to check in about the wedding. I leaned back against the couch. What about it? A pause. Then she said, your Aunt Linda is asking about seating. And I told her I'd confirm whether you're bringing anyone. I laughed, a short, shocked sound that didn't even feel like mine. You think I'm coming? Another pause. Well, she said carefully, you are her sister. There it was. Family. used as a weapon again. Not as comfort, not as care, as leverage. No, I said, I'm not coming. My mother exhaled softly, already irritated. Emma, please don't make this bigger than it needs to be. That sentence did something important inside me. It removed the last excuse. Because when someone looks directly at your wound and still talks only about the inconvenience your pain causes everyone else, there is a freedom in finally stopping the translation work. It is big, I said, and I'm done pretending it isn't. Her voice cooled instantly. People are going to ask questions. Then answer them honestly. A brittle little laugh. You know that's not how these things work. No, I knew exactly how things worked. Truth was never the family priority. Presentation was. I walked to the window. The parking lot below was shining black with rain. A man was unlocking a red sedan with grocery bags balanced against his hip. Normal life everywhere. Always normal life. Even when your own feels split open. Tell them whatever version helps you sleep. I said, you usually do. Silence. Then she said, very quietly, you need to think carefully about the kind of relationship you want with this family. It was meant as a threat, soft enough to deny, clear enough to hear. I smiled to myself, not because it was funny, because for the first time in my life, I actually recognized the move while it was happening. I am thinking carefully, I said, and for once, I'm thinking about myself. Then I hung up. That night my father called. He never confronted, never led, never openly chose the wrong side in a loud enough way to be undeniable. He specialized in erosion, in asking for a little more patience, a little more understanding, a little more time, as if enough softness could turn cowardice into wisdom. Hey, kiddo, he said when I answered. I almost told him not to call me that. Not because I hated it, because it suddenly felt unearned. I heard you talk to your mother. Did she tell you what she said to me? A long exhale. Emma. No. Answer me. Another pause. She said you're upset. I actually laughed. Upset. Such a small word for what betrayal does when it comes from your own family. I am not upset. I said, I am done. He went quiet. Then, carefully, I know you're hurt. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window. You don't know anything. If you did, you would have said something before now. That landed. I could hear it in the silence. But he still reached for the same old shield. I've been trying to keep the peace. There it was. The family religion in one sentence. I know. I said, that's exactly the problem. He didn't answer. Then came the line I knew was coming. The line people use when they have nothing moral left to stand on except biology. She's still your sister. And he was still my fiancé. Silence. Then he tried one more angle. I just don't want this to become something that can't be fixed. That sentence sat between us for several seconds. Because it revealed everything. He still thought the real danger was not what they had done. It was the possibility that I might respond in a way that made the damage permanent. I'm not the one breaking it. I said. Then I ended the call. The wedding was in early June at an estate venue outside the city. White columns, rose garden, a reception hall with warm string lights and glossy wood floors, the kind of place that photographs beautifully and tells lies even better. Exactly the sort of place Claire always loved. By then, she had started posting engagement photos online. Sunset backdrops, soft focus captions, phrases like unexpected love and finding the right person at the right time. As if she had discovered romance in a field somewhere. As if no one had been standing there first. Mallory found the posts before I did. She showed up at my apartment the week before the wedding with iced coffee and a look on her face that meant she had already made a decision. "You're not going," she said. "No." "Good." She handed me a cup. Then she leaned against my kitchen counter and said, "But we are also not spending that day in your apartment crying over people who would call that proof they mattered." I looked at her. "We?" "Yes," she said. "We." There are friendships that feel like rescue boats. Not because they save you dramatically, because they keep showing up. Oar in hand. Until the water stops feeling endless. "What's the plan?" I asked. She smiled. "A better dress, better food, better memory." So on the day Claire married Jason, I did not go to the ceremony. I wore a black dress that made me feel composed instead of wounded. Mallory took me to a rooftop restaurant 40 minutes away with white tablecloths, candles in glass holders, and a view of the river turning silver under the evening sky. The air was warm. Music drifted from somewhere near the bar. The city lights began to come on one by one as the sun lowered behind the buildings. At 7:15, while my sister was probably smiling for photographs with the man who had once sworn forever to me, Mallory raised her glass and said, "To people who survive being underestimated." I touched my glass to hers. "To people who stop auditioning for broken rooms." She grinned. "That one's better." For the first hour, I was almost okay. Not because the hurt was gone, because there is power in refusing to attend your own humiliation. Then at 8:23, my phone buzzed. A cousin I barely spoke to had sent a photo from the reception. Claire in white, Jason in black, both smiling under a floral arch like they had built something noble instead of stolen something easy. The image hit harder than I expected. Not because I wanted him back. That part was dead. It was the performance of legitimacy, the confidence of it, the way the camera flattened everything into a clean story, if you didn't know the cost. Mallory saw my face change. She held out her hand. I gave her the phone. She looked at the screen, then locked it and set it face down on the table. "You do not need live footage of your own disrespect," she said. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. That night I went home and cried anyway. I cried for the wedding I didn't get, for the version of myself who had believed steadiness would be rewarded, for the years I had spent trying to make my family comfortable enough to love me honestly. But sometime around 3 a.m, the crying stopped. And what replaced it was not peace. Not yet. It was clarity. By noon the next day, I had blocked Claire, blocked Jason, blocked my mother. I left my father unblocked for 1 week. Then I blocked him too, after he sent a message that said, "You don't have to do this forever." As if forever were the issue. As if time, not accountability, was the real measure of injury. For the next year, I built my life with both hands. That part matters, because healing is often described too elegantly by people who have already survived it. Mine was not elegant. It was deleting old photos in batches because doing all of them at once made me physically shake. It was learning how to grocery shop for one person again. It was hearing a song in a pharmacy and abandoning a basket near the vitamins because suddenly I couldn't breathe. It was therapy every Tuesday at 6 with a woman named Dr. Wallace, who wore linen blazers and asked questions so direct they made lying feel childish. On our third session, she asked, "What would your anger say if it believed it had a right to speak?" I remember staring at her. Because in my family, my anger had never been treated as useful information. It was treated as evidence of excess, bad tone, poor timing, a flaw to sand down. I looked down at the tissue in my hand. Then I said quietly, "It would say they knew." Dr. Wallace nodded. "Go on." "They knew who Claire was." I said, "They knew how she worked. They knew what she liked doing to me. They knew my whole life. And every single time, they asked me to be the flexible one, the mature one, the one who understood more. They knew." The room stayed silent. "What about Jason?" she asked. I thought for a moment. Then I answered, "He knew enough." "And your anger?" I laughed without humor. "It says I was surrounded by people who benefited from my self-control." That sentence changed me. Because once you see that pattern clearly, you stop mistaking your restraint for virtue, when all it really did was make other people's behavior easier to tolerate. I started working differently after that. Not just harder, more deliberately. I enrolled in an analytics certification program at night, took freelance projects on weekends, rebuilt my portfolio, asked for more responsibility at work instead of assuming loyalty and performance would naturally be noticed if I just kept my head down. Funny thing about the traits my family used to diminish: careful, structured, disciplined, intense. Those same traits turned out to be professionally valuable. I noticed what other people missed. I met deadlines. I could take disorder and make it understandable. I could sit in a mess and find the system beneath it. Within 14 months, I was promoted. 8 months after that, I accepted a role with a larger firm in Chicago with a salary that made my hands tremble when I signed the offer letter. The move felt like oxygen. Chicago gave me distance before it gave me anything else. A new apartment, a new grocery store, a new commute, a city loud enough that my old life did not echo as much. I rented a one-bedroom in Lakeview with tall windows, old floors, and a tiny balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs and one stubborn herb plant that refused to die. In the mornings, the street below smelled like coffee, bread, and bus exhaust. In winter, the lake wind cut through every layer of clothing you owned. In summer, the sidewalks filled with dogs, bikes, restaurant noirs, and the strange relief of being one anonymous person among thousands. For the first time in my adult life, no one around me knew me as Claire's sister. No one knew the family script. I was not the difficult daughter, not the quiet one, not the woman who could be counted on to absorb impact without making a scene. I was just Emma. And it turned out Emma was easier to love in rooms where no one had spent years teaching her to doubt herself. Before I tell you what happened when the past finally found my number again, type karma in the comments if you have ever watched someone destroy something good and call it fate. Chicago changed me slowly. I cut my hair shorter, started hosting small dinners, bought art from street fairs and neighborhood galleries, built routines no one could disrupt with guilt. And about a year after the move, I met Daniel. It happened at a literacy fundraiser. A coworker dragged me to on a Thursday I had almost spent at home in sweatpants. The event was in a converted warehouse with exposed brick beams, soft lights, and too many silent auction baskets nobody actually wanted. I was standing near a display table, pretending to care about a weekend spa package when a man beside me said, I'm convinced no one wants these baskets. We just want to feel like the kind of adults who bid on baskets. I turned and laughed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with warm brown skin, a charcoal jacket, and the kind of calm face that made performance feel pointless. There was a small scar near his eyebrow, and a steadiness in him that didn't feel passive, just grounded. That is exactly what I was thinking, I said. He smiled. Then I trust your judgment. His name was Daniel Brooks. He was an architect. He loved jazz, old bookstores, and public spaces built for actual people instead of impressive brochures. He listened like there was no prize for interrupting. That was new for me. On our third date, we walked along the lake in coats and gloves, while cold wind pushed tears out of the corners of my eyes. He asked about my family. I hesitated. Not because I wanted to lie, because truth, after betrayal. I can feel like handing someone a map of all your weak points. I'm not close with them, I said. By choice, he asked. Yes. He nodded once, then said, that usually means the story is expensive. I looked at him. He kept his eyes on the water. That was the moment I started trusting him. Not because he was perfect, because he did not rush to turn estrangement into tragedy or make reconciliation sound automatically noble. He recognized what it cost. Over time, I told him some of it, not all at once, not in one neat speech. Me sister, my ex, the wedding, my parents, the silence. He never interrupted to turn it into a lesson, never said everything happens for a reason, never asked whether I thought maybe one day I'd forgive them. Instead, he asked better questions. What did that teach you to ignore in yourself? Or, what would it mean to believe your first instinct was right? Or sometimes simply, what did you need then that no one gave you? Those questions did more for me than sympathy ever could. We moved slowly, not because the feeling wasn't there, because it was. But both of us treated intimacy like something worth building carefully. The first time he cooked in my apartment, he brought fresh basil and good bread because he said bad bread ruined, otherwise decent pasta. He moved around my small kitchen, like he understood shared space instinctively, without taking it over. That mattered more to me than grand romance ever could. He did not move through life like a conqueror. He made room. About 2.5 years after Claire's wedding, information from home began drifting back to me through side channels. A cousin, an aunt, a family friend my mother used to teach piano to. Nothing direct, just fragments. Claire's marriage was rocky. Jason had changed jobs. Money was tight. There were arguments. There was drinking. There were rumors of cheating. I did not go looking. That matters. I was not checking her profiles at midnight. I was not asking questions. But information has a way of finding you when family pain circulates like gossip and gossip circulates like weather. Then, one March afternoon, 3 years after the wedding, Jason called. The grocery store, the wine aisle, his name on my screen like a ghost with bad timing. After I left my cart and drove home, I sat in my apartment with my coat still on and stared at the message he had sent. Please, Emma, just talk to me once. Daniel was out of town that day for a client meeting. The apartment was quiet except for the humming heat and the soft tapping of rain against the windows. I should have blocked the number. Part of me wanted to, but another part of me wanted information. Not him, not closure. Information. Why now? How bad was it? What had collapsed so completely that the man who once let my sister win him like a prize had found his way back to me? So I texted one line. "You have 5 minutes." His reply came instantly. "Please let me call." I let it ring once before answering. "Hello?" The first thing I noticed was his breathing. Uneven, thinner than I remembered. "Emma," he said. I hated how familiar my name still sounded in his voice. "You said 5 minutes?" A pause. Then, "I know I don't deserve this." "No," I said. "You don't." He exhaled. "I just didn't know who else to talk to." That almost made me end the call. Not because I felt sorry for him, because the audacity was almost beautiful. "You don't get to call me because your options are low," I said. "I know." "What do you want?" "Jason?" Traffic on his end. A car door closing. Then, finally, Claire left. I said nothing. She moved out 2 months ago. Still nothing. And everything's a mess. That was not an answer. Not to the real question. So I asked it. "Why are you calling me?" A long silence. Then, because you always saw things clearly. There it was. My steadiness, my clarity, my emotional labor, the very parts of me they once found tiresome, now recast as comfort because his life had gone bad. "You mean because I used to do the work of making everything make sense for you?" I said. He did not deny it. Then the story started coming out. The marriage had been bad for a while. They fought constantly. Money tightened after he lost one job and took another for less pay. Claire hated the downgrade in apartment, the downgrade in lifestyle, the downgrade in admiration. He started drinking too much. She accused him of emotional affairs. He admitted there had been messages with a coworker that weren't what they looked like, but also weren't good. I sat very still while he talked. Not because any of it surprised me, because it didn't. When you build a relationship out of betrayal, betrayal becomes part of the foundation. Eventually, the structure cracks exactly where it was always weak. At one point, he said, "I don't even know how I became this person." "You became him gradually." I said, "That's how." Silence. Then more talking, more regret, more explanations, more exhaustion. And then, finally, he said the line that sharpened the whole call into focus. "I made the biggest mistake of my life." I looked out at the rain streaking down the window. "No," I said quietly. "You made a long series of selfish choices and kept calling them feelings." He went quiet. So I kept going. "You did not accidentally end up with my sister. You lied. Repeatedly. You stood inside a promise and let me build a future around it while something else was happening behind my back. That was not one mistake." He sounded smaller when he answered, "I know." Then came the sentence I didn't expect. "She always thought she'd won." My hand tightened around the phone. "Meaning Claire." "She said it once," he continued, "after the wedding, that she had proved some point, that if she wanted something badly enough, she could take it. And after a while, it felt like the winning mattered more to her than the marriage." I closed my eyes. There it was. Not a revelation. A confirmation. The ugliest kind. The kind that doesn't change the past but makes it sickeningly clear. "I don't think she ever loved me the way you think," he said. No, I replied. I don't think she loved you. I think she loved beating me. The line stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he whispered, maybe. That was enough. Because I had spent years with a family that treated Claire's behavior like instability or longing or need, I had translated for them, softened it for them, patted it, explained it. But stripped down to its cleanest truth, Claire liked conquest. That was all. And then Jason said the one thing that made whatever pity was still theoretically possible disappear completely. I still think about us. I laughed. Softly. Tired. Not wounded. There is no us. Emma? No? I stood up and walked to the kitchen. The floor was cool under my feet. You are not calling because you discovered love. I said, you are calling because your life collapsed, and you remembered I used to be where you put your guilt. He started to protest. I cut across him. You need to hear this clearly, because I'm only saying it once. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass over the sink. Older now, stronger in the face, harder to misread. You did not lose me when Claire left you. I said, you lost me when you lied while I was planning a future with you. You lost me when you made me the last person to know what was happening in my own life. You lost me when you let my sister turn my love into a competition and stayed seated at her table. He said my name again. I ignored it. And whatever part of you is hurting now does not get to use my compassion as medicine. Silence. Then I gave him the truest sentence I had. I am happy. Not magically. Not perfectly. But honestly. And you are not welcome inside that. Then I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that. Phone still in my hand. Whole body trembling. Not with fear. Release. When Daniel came home later that night, damp from the weather, and carrying the kind of overnight bag that always looked too practical to be expensive, he took one look at my face and asked, who called? Not what happened. Not are you okay in that vague, panicked way. People ask when they're afraid your emotions might become their task. Who called? Jason. I said. Daniel set his bag down. Do you want tea or a hug first? I laughed and covered my face for a second. Maybe both. So he gave me both. Then I told him everything. The call, the regret, the confession about Claire, the part where Jason said he still thought about us. Daniel listened the whole time with one hand around a mug and his shoulders relaxed. Like the past, did not threaten him because he had no interest in competing with what I had already survived. When I finished, he said only 3 words. You did well. That mattered more than I expected. A week later, Jason texted. I understand. I'm sorry. I blocked the number. That should have been the end. But families like mine rarely knock once. They circle. They test old doors. They assume access if they wait long enough. 2 Sundays later, my father called from a hospital waiting room. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard his voice. It's your mother, he said. She collapsed this morning. They think it's her heart. She's stable now. But they're keeping her overnight. I sat down immediately. Not because everything was forgiven, because the body still reacts to the word mother before the mind gets to vote. What do you need from me? I asked. A pause. Then, she's asking for you. Of course she was. Crisis has a way of clearing a path back to the person who was always expected to carry weight. Aren't you there? I asked. Yes. And Claire? A longer pause. She was. She left. I didn't ask why. Not yet. I'm not getting on a plane tonight. I said. He sounded exhausted. I know. Then, after a moment, she asked me what she did wrong. That sentence landed in a strange place. Not because it softened me, because it revealed how completely my mother had spent years confusing participation in harm with neutrality. You could start with the truth, I said. Then I ended the call. 3 days later, my mother texted from his phone. Can we talk when I'm home? Still no apology. Not yet. Just the familiar reach toward discussion without confession. I didn't answer. Then another message. Please. I think I understand now. I stared at that line for a long time. How convenient. I thought, how late. When Daniel found me on the couch holding the phone, he sat down beside me and asked the best question anyone can ask in moments like that. What do you want? Not what should you do? Not what would make you a good daughter? Not what would prove your heart isn't hard? What do you want? I thought carefully. Then I said, I want to stop carrying the version of this story where I still have to explain myself. He nodded. Then don't. But I wasn't finished. I also want them to hear it once. I said, clearly, not because they deserve closure, because I do. Daniel considered that, then said, that sounds like closure, not reconciliation. Yes. Those are different. They were. So I agreed to one meeting. 1. Public place. My terms. No Claire. I chose a hotel lounge downtown when I flew back to Virginia the next month for a work conference. Neutral ground. Low lighting. Expensive chairs. The faint smell of coffee. Polished wood. And people pretending not to listen. I told my father the place and time. I said if Claire came, I would leave. I said if anyone raised their voice, I would leave. I said I was not there to debate memory. When I walked in, my parents were already seated. My mother looked smaller. Not just thinner, though she was. Paler too, more gray at the temples. But smaller in another way, like a person who had finally run out of ways to arrange the room so she still appeared innocent inside it. My father stood when he saw me. My mother's eyes filled instantly. For the first time in my life, I did not rush to soothe her. I sat down. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then my mother whispered, "Thank you for coming." I nodded once. "Say what you need to say." Her hands trembled slightly against the mug in front of her. Then she said, "I failed you." Simple. Late. True. I held her gaze. She went on. I protected the wrong things. I kept calling it peace. But really, I was protecting comfort. Mine. Your father's. The family image. And I asked you to pay for that over and over again. My father stared at the table. My mother swallowed. I told myself Claire needed more. That she was harder. More fragile. More impulsive. I told myself you were stronger. So I expected more from you. But what I really did was reward cruelty and punish steadiness. That sentence reached all the way through me. Reward cruelty. Punish steadiness. There it was. My whole childhood and adult life. Named cleanly at last. My father finally spoke then. I was a coward. I turned toward him. He did not look away. I thought staying out of it kept me harmless. He said, "But all it did was protect the person doing the harm?" Yes, exactly. For a moment, the three of us just sat there in the warm amber light with years of damage between us. Then I asked the question that still mattered. "Where is Claire?" My mother's face changed. "We're not speaking much." "Why?" My father answered. "After Jason left, there were fights. About money. About promises she claimed we made. About support." Then she said something. He stopped. "What?" My mother looked down at her hands. "She said she should have taken Daniel too," she said quietly. "If she'd had the chance." The room went perfectly still. That one sentence did something all the others hadn't. It stripped away every last romantic myth my parents might have still been holding about Claire's motives. Not love, not confusion, not longing. Conquest. My mother's voice shook. That was the moment I fully understood. Not fully. I thought, just expensively. But I let that thought stay where it was. Because this meeting was not about forcing them into perfect language. It was about hearing enough truth, finally, that I could put mine down. So I asked the only question that mattered next. "Why should I let either of you back into my life?" Neither answered immediately. Then my father said, "You shouldn't. Not unless you want to." That surprised me. My mother nodded through tears. "We don't get to ask for closeness. Only for a chance to act differently, if you ever decide to watch." That was the first thing either of them had said in years that did not sound like strategy. Not guilt. Not pressure. Not blood as blackmail. Consequence. So I gave them the truth I had brought there. "You did not just fail me once," I said. "You built a family system where I was expected to absorb harm quietly so everyone else could stay comfortable. You made my pain look inconvenient. You made my boundaries look cruel. And worst of all, you taught me to doubt my own instincts." My mother cried openly then. My father closed his eyes. I kept going. "If there is any future between us, it will be small, slow, conditionnel, and it will never again require me to pretend." Neither argued. That mattered. More than tears. More than apologies. They did not argue. We talked for another 20 minutes. Health. Work. Chicago. Nothing sentimental enough to become false. Before I stood to leave, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "A letter," she said. "You can read it or not." I took it. Not because I owed her that, because I wanted to choose later. In private, without anyone watching my face. Back in my hotel room, I opened it. 4 handwritten pages. Most of it repeated what she had already said. That she confused management with motherhood. That she had relied on me, because I was easier. That she had hidden behind phrases like family peace and emotional maturity, while asking me to tolerate what should never have been tolerated. Then near the end, there was one paragraph I read 3 times. "I used to tell myself Claire needed me more than you did. The truth is, you frightened me a little. Because you saw things clearly, and I knew that if I agreed with you fully, I would have to change. So I kept asking you to bend instead." I folded the letter slowly. There are apologies that try to get you back. And there are apologies that finally admit the cost. This was the second kind. When I returned to Chicago, I did not suddenly become a daughter again. That is not how truth works. It clarifies. It does not erase. I called my father once a month after that. Short conversations. Weather. Doctor appointments. His vegetable garden. I texted my mother on holidays. Sometimes more. Sometimes not. Claire and I never reconciled. I heard, through drifting family channels, that she moved twice in 1 year, fought with a roommate, started some online business that failed, then disappeared into another relationship with a man nobody trusted. I did not ask for details. At some point, peace requires that you stop collecting proof of what you already know. As for Jason, I never heard from him again. Good. Some endings do not need one final dramatic scene. They just need a door that stays closed. A year later, Daniel proposed. Not publicly, not theatrically, not in a way that confused performance with intimacy. We had spent the afternoon at an outdoor art market, drinking cider and arguing over whether a ceramic lamp was beautiful or just overpriced. By evening, we were back in my apartment with the windows cracked open to cool air and jazz playing softly from the living room. I was in the kitchen cutting pears when he said, "Can you put the knife down for a second?" I turned. He was holding a small ring box in both hands. Steady, not flashy. "I know the history around this question," he said. "So I'm not asking you to believe in fantasy. I'm asking whether you want to keep building a real life with me. Exactly as we are. For as long as we get." Then he added the line that undid me completely. "I don't want to win you. I want to honor you." That was the whole difference. One man wanted possession. The other wanted partnership. One relationship fed on conquest. The other made room for truth. I said yes before he could say anything else. This time, when we planned a wedding, it looked nothing like the first one. Smaller, warmer, private, no giant guest list, no social theater. Mallory was there? Of course, crying before I even reached the end of the aisle. My father came, my mother too. Both sat quietly in the second row. Grateful, I think, not entitled. Claire was not invited. My mother asked once, gently, whether I wanted to discuss that decision. I said no. She nodded. That was the whole conversation. Sometimes growth looks dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a woman hearing a boundary and not trying to negotiate with it. Daniel and I were married in a conservatory filled with late spring light and the smell of eucalyptus and damp earth. My dress was simple. His hands were warm when he took mine. During the vows, I looked at him and felt something I had never felt the first time around. Not excitement. Safety. The real kind. The earned kind. The kind that does not require blindness to survive. At the reception, Mallory gave a toast that made half the room laugh and the other half cry. She raised her glass and said, "Some people spend their whole lives trying to be chosen by the wrong rooms. Emma finally built her own." I still think about that line, because that is what this story was really about. Not my sister, not my ex, not even revenge, if we are being precise. It was about refusing to spend the rest of my life auditioning for people who needed me diminished in order to feel comfortable. 3 years after my sister married my ex-boyfriend to hurt me, he called begging to come back. But by then, he was not calling the same woman he betrayed. He was calling a woman who had learned the difference between being remembered and being valued. between regret and accountability, between blood and safety. And that woman did not go back. She did not rescue him. She did not soften the truth. She did not confuse his collapse with her responsibility. She simply closed the door. If there is a lesson in all this, maybe it is this. The people who benefit most from your silence will always describe your voice as cruelty when you finally use it. Use it anyway. Because peace built on self-betrayal is not peace. It is only quiet, and quiet can cost you your whole life if you stay inside it too long. I used to think vindication would feel loud, triumphant, like a room full of people finally admitting what had been done to me. It didn't. Vindication was quieter than that. It was paying my own rent in a city my old life could not touch. It was choosing a man who treated my boundaries like facts, not obstacles. It was hearing my mother apologize and realizing I no longer needed that apology in order to know I had been right all along. It was watching the past knock and understanding I was under no obligation to answer. And maybe most of all, vindication was this. I became someone. None of them got to narrate anymore. So if you are listening to this while grieving a betrayal that came from inside your own family, if you are still shaking from the way the people closest to you made your pain sound excessive, if you are still wondering whether your leaving was too cold or your boundary was too hard or your silence was too final, hear me clearly. You are allowed to stop explaining the wound to the people who handed it to you. You are allowed to become unreachable in all the places they used to feed on your doubt. You are allowed to build a life so honest that when the past comes back hungry, there is nothing left for it to eat. And sometimes, that is the most complete revenge of all. If this story resonated with you, subscribe for more family betrayal and revenge stories. And tell me where you're watching from. I read more of those comments than you might think.